The telegram arrived in Kenya at dawn. Princess Elizabeth, 25 years old and perched in a treehouse watching elephants drink from a watering hole, had climbed up as heir apparent. She descended as Queen of England. But the woman who felt the death most acutely was not in Africa. She was at Sandringham House in Norfolk, sleeping in a bedroom down the corridor from her husband's corpse. King George VI had gone to bed on February 5, 1952, in seemingly good spirits. He'd spent the afternoon shooting hares on the estate grounds, tramping through frozen Norfolk marshland in tweed and Wellington boots. His color had improved. His appetite was steady. The lung operation 5 months before, that terrifying surgery when doctors removed his entire left lung, appeared to be behind him. He ate well at dinner, retired early. His valet brought the morning tea tray at 7:30, drew back the curtains. The king lay motionless under the covers, his face peaceful. A coronary thrombosis had taken him silently in the night, and Queen Elizabeth woke that morning to discover she had lost everything, not just her husband of nearly 3 decades, her identity, her purpose, her constitutional role. At 51 years old, she was no longer Queen Consort of the United Kingdom, no longer Empress of India, no longer Supreme Governor of the Church of England. She was nothing in particular. The British Constitution had never adequately defined what a widowed queen consort was supposed to do with the rest of her life. Queen Mary, widow of George V, had solved the title problem by simply remaining Queen Mary, refusing any maternal designation, holding herself apart in stern Victorian dignity. The new widow would become Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. The words sounded dignified. They masked a profound vacancy, a title without a job description, a crown without a throne. The machinery of state pivoted with brutal efficiency. Within hours, every telegram, every protocol, every flag dropping to half-mast, all of it centered on the new queen. Still making her way home from Africa, staff at Buckingham Palace began discreetly packing the widow's belongings. The Lord Chamberlain's office assigned her Clarence House, the London residence vacated by her daughter's family. The message was polite. The message was clear. Buckingham Palace belonged to the Queen now. Everyone knew their place, except the woman who had occupied the throne beside her husband for 15 years. The state funeral on February 15th proceeded with all the solemn grandeur the British establishment could muster. The gun carriage bearing the king's coffin rolled through London streets lined with silent crowds. The Queen Mother wore black crepe, a heavy mourning veil obscuring her face. She accepted condolences from heads of state. She performed the role of grieving widow with the same discipline she'd brought to every public duty. And then she disappeared. She retreated to Scotland, to Birk Hall, the modest whitewashed house on the Balmoral estate where she and the king had spent their happiest years. The public understood. Grief required privacy. What they did not understand was that this withdrawal was not merely mourning. It was an existential collapse. The woman who had walked through bomb-damaged East End streets during the Blitz, who had declared she was glad Buckingham Palace had been hit because now she could look the East End in the face, who had charmed Churchill and Roosevelt and de Gaulle, who had stiffened her husband's resolve when he trembled before the microphone. This woman was now nothing in particular, and the palace seemed perfectly content to let her remain nothing indefinitely. The summer of 1952 found the Queen Mother still in Scotland, still draped in widow's weeds. The heather bloomed purple on the hillsides around Birk Hall. The salmon ran in the muck. She walked the grounds alone, or with her dogs, or with Princess Margaret. The calendar turned. March, April, May, June. The coronation preparations consumed everyone's attention. Tailors measured the new queen for her gown. Goldsmiths polished the crown jewels. Westminster Abbey underwent renovation. And an uncomfortable question surfaced that the palace had deferred but could not indefinitely avoid. What was to be done with her? Parliament moved quickly to secure her financial position. The civil list debate in July allocated £70,000 per year for the Queen Mother's household, a substantial sum. She could maintain Clarence House, employ staff, live in comfort appropriate to her station. Money would not be a problem. Purpose was another matter entirely. She had no constitutional role, no ceremonial duties requiring her presence, no obvious function in the architecture of state. She was 51 years old, vigorous in body despite the emotional devastation, sharp in mind, possessed of extraordinary social gifts. She faced 4 or 5 decades of elegant irrelevance. The prospect was unbearable. Then the government floated an idea: send her to Australia as Governor General. Winston Churchill himself, returned to Downing Street for his second premiership at 77 years old, was the architect of this proposal. The reasoning seemed sound. Australia needed a Governor General. The role carried dignity without constitutional complexity. She would represent the Crown in the Southern Hemisphere while her daughter reigned in London. But beneath the polite language lay a different calculation, a polite form of exile dressed as honor. Ship her to the far side of the world. Let her preside over colonial ceremonies in Sydney and Melbourne, open hospitals and agricultural shows, wave from motorcades through Perth and Brisbane. Keep her busy. Keep her visible. Keep her 10,000 miles from London, where her presence might complicate her daughter's emergence as queen. The proposal died in bureaucratic consultation before reaching formal discussion, victim of logistical complications and the Queen Mother's own ambivalence. But its existence revealed the establishment's uncertainty. Nobody knew what to do with her, including, perhaps, herself. It was during these long Scottish days, with the mist rolling down from Lochnagar and the rain drumming against Birkhall's windows, that she drove with friends to the remote northern coast of Caithness, that wind-scoured corner of Scotland where the sea crashes against black cliffs and the landscape belongs to another century entirely. Commander Clare Viner and his wife, Lady Doris, had invited her to their estate, hoping a change of scenery might lift her spirits. The road north from Inverness wound through increasingly desolate country. The towns grew smaller. The trees disappeared. By the time they reached Caithness, the landscape was treeless moorland, stretching to horizons broken only by isolated crofts and the occasional standing stone. This was not picturesque Scotland. This was harsh Scotland, ancient Scotland, a place where the wind never stopped and the winters lasted 6 months. And there, perched on a headland overlooking the Pentland Firth with the Orkney Islands visible on clear days, she spotted ruins. Barragill Castle, later renamed the Castle of Mey, a 16th-century tower house in spectacular disrepair. Windows gaped empty, the glass long since shattered by storms. Gardens that had once been formal lay overgrown with nettles and bracken. The roof leaked. The walls showed cracks. Local authorities were discussing demolition. The Queen Mother walked through those desolate rooms, her footsteps echoing on stone floors. She looked out through empty window frames at the sea crashing against rocks below. The Pentland Firth is one of the most treacherous stretches of water in Europe, where Atlantic and North Sea collide in violent confusion. The view was sublime in its bleakness. Something stirred in her. She bought it. £100 for a medieval ruin in the remotest corner of the British mainland. The purchase defied logic. A widow in her 50s, prostrated by grief, suddenly acquiring a wreck of a castle? But the significance extended far beyond real estate. She was not retreating to a palace provided by the state, not settling into rooms assigned by the Lord Chamberlain's office with their schedules of modest public appearances, not accepting the passive role British institutions had traditionally assigned to dowager queens. She was carving out territory of her own, creating a personal domain in the place farthest from London she could find while remaining in the United Kingdom, asserting agency at precisely the moment the establishment expected her to surrender it. The Castle of Mey, that impulse purchase from the depths of grief, became not a prison but a refuge. She entertained friends and family there, walking on windswept beaches where seals basked on rocks, looking out at the gray water of the Pentland Firth toward Orkney. The renovation she oversaw transformed the ruin into a comfortable country home. She created gardens within protective walls. coaxing flowers to bloom in the harsh northern climate. The castle she had discovered in despair became a place of restoration, not a retreat from life, a shelter for it. And here is the irony that posterity would record. The woman whom the establishment struggled to define outlived virtually everyone who had attended her husband's funeral. She outlived Churchill, dead in 1965. She outlived Anthony Eden and Harold Macmillan and all the other prime ministers who had served her daughter in the early years. She outlived her own daughter, Princess Margaret, dead in February 2002. She died at 101 years old on March 30th, 2002, having waved to crowds from Buckingham Palace's balcony at her centenary celebrations just 2 years before. The officials who had proposed the Australian exile were long dead. The courtiers who had shuffled papers about arrangements for the widow had retired to obscurity and then to graves. The skeptics who had assumed she would fade away, who had written her off as a pleasant relic of a vanished reign, had been proven spectacularly wrong. She had refused to disappear. She had refused to accept the institutional fate prepared for her convenience and everyone else's comfort. She had carved out a role that no one had envisioned and performed it for 50 years. The Castle of Mey passed to a charitable trust. It remains open to visitors today, who can walk through rooms she decorated, see photographs she displayed, look out windows at the same views of Orkney that had captivated a grieving widow in 1952. That is her legacy. Not just longevity, not just charm, but the demonstration that reinvention is possible even when institutions insist otherwise. That grief can become fuel. That purpose can be created when none is offered. That a woman whom everyone wanted to retire proved everyone wrong by refusing to stop working until she was 101 years old. She had been told, in those dark months of 1952, that her useful life was over, that the proper course was quiet retirement, that the crown had no further need of her services. She had chosen differently, and in choosing differently, she had created something that had never existed before.